Thank you. Hi, I'm Molly Brown. I'm a transfer advisor here at North, and we're talking about writing a personal statement to help you with your transfer applications today. And I'm joined by Jeff Janasek, um, faculty coordinator of our Page One Writing Center and English instructor. So first off, I want to talk about, well, why is it important to write a strong personal statement? Really, it's a chance to tell your story. It's really the only chance you get to share information about yourself other than your grades, your transcripts with the university. They don't often get to meet you, or if they do, it's not recorded anywhere. It's also important for you to demonstrate your ability to write, so to write like a college student and show that you've been doing that. It's also a great chance to show why you want to attend your particular program of study. So to affirm your desire to be at that university and in that particular major. And then finally, it's a chance to improve your acceptance or improve your chances for admission. In the direct words of university admission staff that I have heard, a personal statement is never a reason to deny a student, but it can be a reason to admit them. So the first thing to think about is, well, know who you're writing for. Read the personal statement guidelines that you're given in the application materials carefully so that you know what they want you to do. And you can start to read between the lines to figure out what they want to know more about you. What personal qualities do they value? What types of students are they looking for? And other places to look for this, and Jeff will talk about this later, is the university mission statement, the department information, what things they value, and so that you can look for how do you match up with those things. Not that you want to try to fit yourself into their mold, but if something that they value resonates with you, you want to call that to their attention. So you can often kind of read between the lines on those personal statement guidelines to figure out what they would like to hear about you. And that gets to the unspoken questions in writing your statement. Have you done your research? Do you know enough about the school and the program that you have figured out that it is a good fit for you? Can you follow directions? Are you answering all of the components that they are asking you to address? And underneath that it really gets to, do you want this opportunity? Is this something that is really important to you and important enough that you spent the time to write a good essay that answers all the questions they're asking? So going back to looking at the university guidelines, many students answered that they're applying to the University of Washington, very common, just across the freeway, big school, lots of majors. Their prompts are pretty specific. So maybe you've looked at those especially if you're planning to apply for fall coming up. If you're applying to other schools as well, which I certainly encourage, you want to read those guidelines just as carefully because each prompt is different and will speak to the different values, mission, organization of that particular school. For instance, if you're applying to Seattle U, their statement asks about their mission as a Jesuit institution. As a Catholic Jesuit institution. And that may or may not be important to you, but it's something to learn about that institution. The prompt may be major specific. For instance, if you're applying to UW-Bothell, their prompts are all major specific because you're applying to the major at that institution. Within the guidelines, within the questions they're asking, I always encourage students to look for opportunities to talk about challenges you've overcome. Maybe those are hardships. Maybe those are times you struggled with school or struggled to be in school. Talk about experiences outside of school. Because remember, this is the chance you have to tell them about who you are as a whole person. So, what is unique about you? What family commitments, community organizations, other connections are important to you? This is where you put that in an application. Just a note about format. Generally, now applications use an online submission format. So you don't want to worry about making it pretty in Microsoft Word or anything like that. You want to make it pretty simple. So you're working on it in a word processing program of some sort, and then you're copying and pasting it. Don't worry about losing nice formatting. Just make sure that it's understandable. Formatting is not important when it's submitted online. When you're looking at hard copy submission options, that comes up every once in a while, like if you're applying to the UW Seattle for spring quarters, then you want to look a little bit more carefully at what they're asking for. And then a final note for me is to really make your essay personal and memorable. Jeff will come back to this using specific examples about you and about your experiences. If you think about a big university like the University of Washington, Seattle, they are reading thousands of essays every year. And they can sometimes kind of seem the same. There are a lot of students who are applying to similar programs, have taken similar classes. You want to do as much as you can to make yours one that they remember, one that they read and then stand up and say, I want to meet this student belongs at the university. And you do that by making it about you and writing well. So I'm going to turn things over to Jeff now.
All right, thanks, Molly. So, given everything that Molly has just said, let's start talking about the specifics of writing the personal statement. As Molly suggested, the first thing you want to do is to look at the prompt, right, or the description for that particular, the personal statement for that particular university. Sometimes they have specific questions and you want to answer those questions. That said, most personal statements include 4 parts. The first one is an introduction with a hook. That means something to kind of get your reader's attention. As Molly said, the readers of these personal statements will be looking at hundreds of them, right? And you want yours to stand out. And it's best to do that right from the beginning, right? You want something right up front that really sort of gets the reader's attention and makes them want to keep reading your personal statement with interest. The second part is, what have you done? What have you done both in your life in general, and what have you done specifically academically in school or in extracurriculars or volunteer work, things that you have done that have prepared you to be a student at the respective university. The third part is, what will you do when you get there, right? It's good to have some kind of plan, even if it's not an incredibly specific plan. You want to indicate that you've given some thought to your studies, right? That you're not just applying because it's a whim or whatever, right? You want to kind of show that you're applying for a particular reason and this is what you want to do. Lastly, why this particular school? And then even maybe why this particular program at this particular school, right? And this is where you are going to maybe do a little bit of research and then incorporate that into your personal statement. Okay, next slide, please. So getting started, as I just mentioned, the first thing you want to do is read the guidelines and questions very carefully to make sure that you're incorporating all of the key points or questions that are included in the prompt. Then you want to start generating material, right? In my writing classes, I always emphasize the writing process, right? That is, you don't sit down and write the document in one sitting, right? You start by brainstorming, you start drafting, you revise, maybe get some other eyes on it, do some more revisions. The more revisions, the better, right? Good writing comes from engaging in this process of drafting, revision, revision, revision. You don't want to sit down and write this document all at once, right? So you want to brainstorm, start by brainstorming, idea mapping, and free writing, which is one of my favorite activities, where you sit down and you just kind of start writing whatever comes to your head. I think it's helpful to have some targeted questions. You might ask yourself, for example, and we're about to do this in breakout rooms, but what have I done, for example, which is that part 2. You can just kind of start writing. Don't edit yourself, as we'll talk about. Don't worry about writing elegant prose, because you can always go back and revise, right? So you want to just get ideas on the paper. And then eventually you're going to have to or want to organize all of those ideas into a coherent narrative, right? So creating an outline to organize the information can be very useful. Okay. It's really helpful to have a theme to organize your ideas, right? This kind of helps create a particular narrative. It gives coherence to the personal statement. It helps to draw your reader through the personal statement like a story, right? So you have to have a unifying idea, right? Some examples are overcoming challenges, helping others, building community. I would add maybe a particular academic interest that maybe has been an interest of yours throughout your life. You want to pick something that's going to kind of help shape this narrative again and give it unity. You want to create coherence. You again draw the reader through. Next slide, please. So, why a narrative? I've already mentioned a little bit about this, but again, it tells a story that builds to an important change, right? It involves confronting and overcoming challenges. You weave together different aspects, right? Academic, career, and personal goals. It tells the story of who you are, right? We've all read stories. Maybe we've written some of them. But the idea is that you want to have movement. Again, it kind of catches that reader's attention. It keeps the reader engaged in your narrative. Down at the bottom here, we have kind of a classic, what we might call a plot arc, right? Which has, you have the setting and characters. This would be your introduction, right? Where you introduce yourself. It gives problem, rising action. It eventually hits a climax. And then you have at the end, the denouement, which is a fancy French word for conclusion, basically. As I've mentioned before, I might reimagine this plot arc in your personal statement as a continuing upward trajectory, right? That finishes with you graduating from that university, right? So instead of falling down to some kind of inactive conclusion, right? It begins with introducing who you are. You rise with the action describing what you've done. That climax might be getting into that university, but then also continuing through until graduation, right? Incorporating what you plan to do at that university. Okay, next slide. So, how do you create a good story? Show, don't tell, right? This is what people, I don't know if you've ever taken a creative writing class, but if you have, you've definitely heard this phrase before. Creative writers always say this, show, don't tell. And what that means is be specific, right? The last thing you want to do is to write a cliched narrative, right? Something that sounds familiar. You've heard it a million times before. Overcoming challenges, for example, we've all overcome challenges, right? Perhaps some of us have overcome larger challenges than others, but we've all done it, right? So how do you make this story unique to you? You want to use specific examples, right? Create images. Don't just kind of use platitudes or cliches or sort of overly general language to explain these things. Next slide, please. Again, be creative, be an individual, set yourself apart, show off your individuality, surprise yourself with the story of you. Again, though, you don't want to talk about how you're an individual. You want to show that you're an individual through specific details, right? If you talk about being an individual, that just becomes a cliche. If you show your reader things that you've done and creates an image of individuality, it gets more personal, it's more interesting to read. Okay, so we're going to start kind of getting into this now, right? If you happen to have a paper with you or you have something to type on, you might want to start with defining events that in your life that led you to this point, right? So we're looking at this kind of the first and the second parts of that personal statement, introducing you as a person, as a unique, interesting person, and talking about sort of some of the themes, things that have been important to you in your life, right? As I mentioned before, don't edit yourself. Don't stop to think of the right word. Don't worry about grammar. Just keep writing, right? Because you can always come back to it and revise and shape those words into, something more beautiful. That's the beauty of the writing process, right? So whatever comes to your mind, just write it down. You're not going to use all of it, but sometimes you have to write a bunch of bad ideas before you get to the good ones, right? So just keep writing. And I think at this point, right, we're going to break out into breakout rooms for the first writing exercise. So Molly is going to arrange that. Well, I hope everyone had a productive experience in the breakout room. Our group certainly did. We talked about kind of just getting ideas on the page in terms of your sort of personal experience, what motivates you as a student. We're going to kind of take a step forward here and start looking more specifically at themes, academic themes, and other, ways to tie it all together. Okay, so it says on a separate piece of paper, maybe on the same piece of paper, whatever. It probably doesn't matter. But you might want to write down some of these questions to think about, right? Academic history, personal history, your major and career goals, cultural understanding, educational challenges that you've met, community or volunteer service, experiential learning, whatever, these kind of tying that sort of personal aspect that we were discussing in the first round into kind of trying to tie that into an academic setting, right? And what we're doing here too is we're trying to connect these ideas in order to produce a narrative, right? That story that we talked about earlier. So I believe we're going into another round of breakout rooms, and I'm happy to continue the conversation I was having with those earlier, or we can start new ones, but here we go. All right. So we've had two brainstorming sessions. The first one kind of creating a persona, right? Creating, you as an individual, showing, not telling. And then lastly, we've sort of moved from that persona to academic or life experience, right? So we're kind of moving up the plot arc a little bit, right? So what we want to do now is give it some context, give it, kind of flesh it out a little bit and start to develop a pattern that's going to allow that arc to kind of take shape, become more three-dimensional, right? So read over your lists, and I'm assuming that you're going to have to go back and probably, we kind of tried out the free writing, but you want to take more time to do this, right, on your own. But once you get a bunch of material written down, start reading over it, right? And try to identify a pattern, right? Is there one type of event or personality trait that pops up again and again? What kind of path led you here? Was it a straight line, or was it kind of a treacherous climb, as we say? What does that arc look like? And what motivators have influenced your decisions throughout your life, right? We're trying to connect the dots, right? So that we can kind of create this coherent narrative of who you are as a person, who you are as a student, so that we can keep continuing to who you are going to be as a student at whatever respective university it is you're applying to. Can we advance? So again, here we are back to the plot arc. Develop a working outline. I'm assuming most of you have worked with outlines before, right? There's not, at least when I teach outlines, I'm not so interested in the rigid Roman numeral 1, capital letter A, lowercase, I don't follow that as much as maybe others do, but I think it's important to have your own logic just so that you can understand the outline you're creating, right? But maybe start drafting an outline based on those 4 sections that we talked about, right? Introduction with the hook, what have you done, what will you do, and why this university, and kind of start plugging, some of that information that you've developed in your brainstorming or free writing sessions into the outline, so that maybe you can kind of start writing that story. So now we get to the last section, right? Why this school? Why this particular program? So take a look at the webpage, right? For if you know what program you want to go into. We talked about the oceanography school at UW, for example, in our breakout room. Take a look at their website. Every department has their own website, right? Surf around, click on links, take a look at the faculty. Different programs have faculty that specialize in different aspects of that particular field, right? So if you're interested in one particular area of oceanography, you see a faculty member that sort of resonates with you, right, that their specialty is really in line, it doesn't maybe hurt to say that you might want to study with this professor, right? But the idea is we want to get specific, again, letting the university know that you're not sort of arbitrarily applying there, but you really kind of see yourself at UW or Seattle University, right? You're placing yourself there in your own narrative. So once you've got a narrative drafted, right? We've taken the free writing, we've applied it, maybe put it into an outline and started writing our first draft of the personal statement. What do you do after this? Again, this comes back to the writing process, right? You want to write a draft, step away from it for a day or so. Of course, this implies that you can't wait until the last minute to write your draft, all right? You want to start as early as possible so you can revise and revise. The last time I wrote personal statements for grad school for my PhD program, I think I wrote something like 19 or 20 drafts of the personal statement before I was finished with it. And the final product looked so drastically different from the first one I wrote that it was a completely different document. So, but you have to you have to start early and write drafts so that you can get to that point. Come visit the Page One Writing Center. It's free. Our tutors are well-versed in personal statements. They are more than happy to talk to you about your personal statement. If you have friends who are also applying, or if you know someone who's maybe already at the school that you're going to, or some friends who are maybe in grad school or about to graduate, ask them to take a look at your draft, right? then bring it back, write it, start shaping it into a more polished draft every time you go, right? The more you revise, the better. All right.
I'm just going to add there that if you are applying to UW-Bothell or to Western Washington University, those institutions specifically have said that they will review your statement, UW-Bothell's Writing Center and Western's admissions staff. So if you're applying to a different institution, ask, probably not UW-Seattle, but registered student organizations at UW-Seattle will, the Informatics Student Club, the Nursing Student Club. So look for those opportunities for people at those institutions to review your statement as well.
Your professors, you can always ask them to take a look. I imagine most professors would be happy to look at it and give you some feedback, as long as they're not completely swamped. Maybe don't wait until the last week of the term to do it. But that's a very helpful resource as well. Okay, so up until now, we've talked about what you should do in your as you write your personal statement, the steps you take, what should go in it. Let's talk briefly about things you want to avoid in the personal statement. I've already mentioned a couple of these in the breakout rooms and before, but the first thing you want to do is avoid cliches and stereotypes, right? Don't write a narrative that sounds so familiar, right, that people have heard it a million times, right? If you find yourself kind of writing into a pattern that is already exists, you're probably writing a cliched narrative, right? How do you fix that? Be specific, right? You don't want to fawn over the school. That is, you don't want to talk about how great UW is or how great you think UW is. It's a waste of space, really, and it doesn't serve any purpose. And it also shows lack of specificity. So you want to focus on what you've done, who you are, and what you're going to do. Avoid talking about money as a motivator. Stick to your academic interests, right? Academics tend to get turned off a little bit when you talk about, so I want to go into the business school because I want to make six-figure salary or something like that. That doesn't do much for the actual academic program in terms of convincing them that you're going to be an engaged student. You don't want to complain too much. Sometimes maybe there's a fine line between talking about overcoming diversity and complaining. You kind of want to stick to that. Think again about that arc, right? It should be going upwards, right? You don't want the low plot arc to sit at the bottom too long. This is probably obvious, but is easier said than done, or the other way around. Spelling the school name incorrectly, right? Or writing the wrong school name in an application. Say you're writing applications, personal statements to 3 schools. Don't send Seattle University a personal statement that talks about UW. I've done this, and it's really embarrassing. And chances are they're just going to toss that one out. So make sure, and we'll go at the end here. We'll talk about proofreading. The last thing you should do is make sure you proofread the document. Make sure that the right school's name is in there. Make sure if you mention any faculty, make sure you spell their name correctly and use the proper title. Also, make sure you save, if you are doing different online personal statements sent to different schools, make sure you save them differently. You don't want UW personal statement .pdf sent to Seattle University. That might not apply, but that's also something that you should think of. You don't want to use informal tone. Do you want to have voice? Yes, ideally you want to have voice, but you want to show them that you can write like a professional college student, right? This is your chance to show the school that you are experienced enough to be able to do work at this particular university. So make sure that it's a formally written document, right? Don't use slang. Don't make sure there are no misspelled words or poor grammar. Again, this is a proofreading issue, an editing issue. If you're unsure about your grammar skills, go to page 1. Our tutors are there to help you, and they will definitely do so. So again, editing, proofreading, I can't say this enough. I'm adamant about editing and proofreading in my writing classes because it's the end of the writing process. You revise, and then you get to the editing process. I love the editing process because it's where you kind of get to sort of bask in the work you've already done and make it even more beautiful. Make sure if there's a word limit that you hit the word limit and you don't go over. You ideally want to be as close to the word limit as you can without going over the word limit. If you're not sure on how to do that, most writing software, word processing software will have a word count in the bottom left. You can take a look at it and make sure that it's at the right number. Edit for clarity and concision. So what I always tell my students is to write more than you need to, because you want to go down and you edit it down, right? The fewer words you use, the more powerful those words are when you say them, right? So you want to you don't overuse adverbs. Don't make sure your verb tenses are nice, strong verb tenses. You don't have is's and are's in there, things like that. You want to make sure it's nice and powerful. The best way to do this is to read your document aloud slowly to yourself, or have someone read it to you as you're looking on. Sometimes we catch things when we are editing that we don't catch, that is when we're reading aloud, that we don't catch when we're reading in our head, because our brains tend to autocorrect. We're smart like that. So, but when you read aloud, sometimes you'll trip over a sentence. If that's the case, the sentence probably is awkward. Stop and fix it, right? Make it clear what's wrong. Correct any awkward wording, punctuation errors, spelling errors, or typos. That's the last step, right? Proofreading. Okay. So that was a lot maybe to take in a brief amount of time, but hopefully you got an idea of what is expected and what the writing process for the personal statement looks like. Do you have any questions for either me or Molly?